I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Hello, my beautiful people. I am so excited to tell you that today is the 100th episode of Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. I literally cannot believe it. But I did want to stop and just say thank you to you, the fans, the people who keep this show going, who are helping this grow and become something so special. Some of you have become friends, and I'm just so beyond grateful to you for the support you've shown me and the show, and helping me find guests and introducing me to new people that I never would have met otherwise. I am just so impressed with how much joy doing this brings to my life, and how much I look forward to the interviews and editing and getting the next show out there. And it's just so much fun. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about other people, and it's just been such an exciting journey to be on. And the fact that you guys keep coming back week after week to listen to the episodes is just beyond anything I could have imagined for myself. So thank you so much for being here, for supporting the show, for making this a dream come true for me. A dream I didn't even really know existed until I started just putting one foot in front of the other. And I couldn't have done this without my husband. He is the reason I even know how to edit my own episodes and do all the fun lighting and recording and all the things. And it ultimately was his idea originally, and I'm just super grateful to him for that, because I never would have broken out of my own comfort zone to do this if it wasn't for his gentle, loving encouragement. To Miranda for helping me get started when I was really scared to do it by myself. I really, truly appreciate that you were willing to put yourself out there to help me, and you always have my heart. You know that. Yeah, thank you. And to Jen and Beth for being there in the beginning too, to help push things along and be guests and get us started. Your support and guidance and love has just meant the entire world to me. So thank you. And to those of you who have been guests on the show, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't say it enough times. You're the whole reason we're here. You're the whole reason I get to do this. So I know I've said really and very, but I don't have a big enough vocabulary to express just how much it means to me. I am deeply grateful, and I hope you know that, and I hope you can see that, and I hope I do a good job conveying you through the podcast. So thank you for trusting me. Some of you have gotten really vulnerable with me and told me some really special stories, and that means the world to me, that you feel safe to talk with me. That's all I want, is for people to be real. I'm trying to be real with you and real with myself. And you guys are getting to see me kind of grow real time. I know I've changed a lot within myself, as growth has occurred over the last 2 years of the show, and knowing more about myself, learning more about the quilting community, and more about you, the listener. It's just been an amazing ride. So thank you for 100 episodes, and I am so excited to hopefully get 100 more under our belts and see where we go. So thank you again, and I'm so excited to bring to this 100th episode Karlee Porter. Welcome to today's episode. I'm so glad you're here. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode. Karlee Porter is here of Karlee Porter Designs. She is I don't even know what to call her. She's the gorgeous creative brain behind Graffiti Quilting and Honest Fabric Company. Okay, so if you have not seen her stuff, I really would urge you, I'm begging you to go check it out. She's at Karlee Porter Design on Instagram, and at karleeporter.com on her website. She is an amazing artist. She has just such an amazing style, and she teaches an online class for learning graffiti art. And she's getting ready to launch the 10-year anniversary of her graffiti quilting book, which you can only get when you sign up for her class. Signups are available now until the class starts on September 7th. So if you want to learn some more free motion technique, to get more comfortable with free motion quilting on your long arm machine, this is the place to go. She will be the first person to tell you that she has an amazing class with tons of amazing content. The book itself acts as the textbook for the class and has QR codes to external resources and videos. So you will have everything you need to become a fantastic graffiti quilter. So, all that said, please join me in welcoming and listening to Karlee Porter. Welcome to the show, Karlee. How are you today?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been so excited to talk to you. I am a long armor and I love just everything I see of yours. So this has been super exciting to anticipate happening.
Oh, well, thank you. It probably helps that I only show stuff that I'd like to show off. You just don't get to see all the bad stuff. So it
Same.
doesn't surprise me that you love everything I do.
That's how it's supposed to be, right? Like only best foot forward.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, I'm so excited to get into where you're at now, but I want to go back and let's talk about how you got into quilting in the first place.
Okay, so I like to introduce myself as an artist who happens to make quilts
Mm,
versus being a quilter who makes artistic quilts,
mhm,
because my artistic journey has been as long as I can remember, ever since childhood. It was like that was always the gift I was given at birthdays and Christmas, was like some sort of crafting or artistic supply.
mhm.
I spent many a weekends and spring breaks at home in my room crafting. Like, I thought I was so cool when I was a freshman in high school, because the entire spring break week that we had off school, I
Mhm.
spent it sewing buttons onto my backpack.
Oh my gosh.
And like, I thought I was so cool. Nobody else gave a crap, but like, that was like, I was that kid in high school that was like,
Yeah.
um, just crafting, like DIY slash like very artsy. Like, I would get a new folder and immediately draw all over it, or
Mhm, mhm,
a blank sweater, and then I would like draw like my tag graffiti style on it. So I was always like constantly just like coloring things up.
yeah.
um, so that was kind of my upbringing as a kid. I'm number 7 out of 8 children.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
All, and it was all within an 11-year span from the same mom and dad.
Your mom. Oh my gosh.
I know. I know, poor lady, right?
Mm,
So along with like having this, like we all kind of had our own thing that we were into. But along with that, we were also not an affluent family. So
mhm,
with being creative, I also learned from a really young age how to be very like entrepreneurial. It
mhm.
was like if I wanted something, I had to figure out how to earn the money to get it, because my parents were not not
Right.
just like handing out, you know, what's that word that kids get? Allowance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I make that sound like I'm joking. I really couldn't think of the word, but
Yeah.
like we weren't raised to
Mhm.
give an allowance. It was like, okay, fold everybody's socks or do a pile of laundry or something extra to try to earn money, because our
Yeah.
resources were very tight.
Right.
And so in high school, especially, is kind of when I feel like the entrepreneurial bug really hit me. Like, I would make homemade caramels and sell them out of my locker, or
Ooh.
people would bring me like um, blank sweaters or notebooks, and I would do something cool on them, and they'd pay me like $10 or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool, because my artistic journey and my like businesswoman journey were always very intertwined in that way,
Mhm,
along with just like showing off. Like, I think I'm just kind of a natural show off, and especially in a big family, being the youngest, the second to youngest, I had to be loud and noisy if I wanted to be noticed. And so
mhm.
that kind of translated into my adolescence of like what could I do to be noticed and get attention, which sounds like really sad now, but um but it was cool because I was able to keep working on my art and my skills, and, when you're young, you need, like, the affirmation, the
Mhm.
outside validation that's like, "Hey, keep pursuing this," and that was really
Yeah.
cool that I was able to kind of harness that, um, and then, after high school, I, got married, and that was when my quilting journey started. So
Mm.
after I graduated high school, I was like, "I don't wanna go to college, I'm, like, so tired of school." I'm not a school person, I don't know how I graduated high school because I skipped so many classes to just sneak into the art room, and I would
Mm.
get away with it somehow. My art teacher loved me. He was
Mm.
like, just I was like kind of a star student because I was showing up and doing the work and
Yeah.
really just eating up everything that he was teaching. Um, and so after high school, I was like, okay, I'm, a newlywed and I don't want to go to college. I just want to find a job, maybe with good health insurance and start earning some money, because I
Mhm.
wanted to kind of get out of that, lower class financial situation.
Yeah.
And I knew I didn't wanna do school, but I knew that I had marketable skills. So
Mhm.
anyways, so I started putting out my, resume everywhere, like, it was nothing fancy. It was like a Mexican restaurant and an ice cream shop, and, like, I did some political polling, like,
Mm.
a resume
Yeah.
that was not impressive by any means. It was entry level. But I thought, "I just need to find a full-time job where I can help, put my husband through college,"
Mhm.
and so I put out my resume to anywhere within a 50-mile radius of my house. And I got a call from a manufacturing company that was like, "Hey, we have this like entry level job where you'll be like building subcomponents of heavy machinery." And I was like, "Okay, well,
Okay.
you called me, so I guess I'll come interview if you
Yeah.
think scooping ice cream has some sort of like, transferable skill over to it."
Right. Yeah.
And so I went and did the interview, and that was when I beheld a quilting machine for the first time because this
Oh.
manufacturing company was a quilting machine company. So HandiQuilter is like 40 miles away from my house. I had no
Yeah.
idea who they were, no idea what a long arm quilting machine was. And when I went to my interview, they were like, "Okay, you're going to be building like subcomponents and like circuit boards and mechanical components that go into this machine. And
Mhm.
then you're going to learn how to test these machines and like sign them off before they get shipped to customers." So my first experience running a long arm quilting machine was literally doing the same four designs over and over and over again for 40 hours a week. So I was getting paid to learn how to run a quilting machine,
Yeah.
even though I wasn't getting paid to learn how to do it artfully.
Right.
That was kind of my transfer into quilting as an art genre.
Mhm.
And it wasn't very long after that that one of the benefits of working for them is that if there were like refurbished machines or used machines, they would allow the employees to take them home and have them on loan. And so I had this tiny little sit down quilting machine, like one of the original HQ16s.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I had that at home. And when my husband, we both worked full time during the day. And then we'd come home and we lived in this little basement apartment, and he would be knee deep in homework. And
Mhm.
all of the things that were like in my sketchbooks and in my brain that I wanted to try quilting that I had already been drawing for years and years,
Yeah.
I would just sit at the quilting machine and stitch those out on my own time. And so it was kind of funny because when I started my business, my tagline at the beginning was quilter by day, quilter by night, because I
Yeah.
was just constantly quilting.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of cool because I was really getting all of this like deep, deep muscle memory practice.
Mhm.
And I was also learning how to quilt on a stand up orientation machine and a sit down orientation machine
Yeah.
simultaneously. So it was like, being raised bilingual, but with two machine orientations.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I jumped into the deep end of quilting, was working for one of the large quilting machine companies, but then being able to explore my artistic abilities without just, having no social life while my husband's at school.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's,
Yeah.
incredible, and, like, what a crazy, like, serendipitous little situation to be like,
Yeah.
"We're gonna take a chance on this girl." Like, what?
Right. Yeah.
Seems
Well,
like
and I mean, I had probably sent out my resume to like 30 or 40 places all within, all
Yeah.
within the area, and, the cool thing too was, like, when they hired me, they were not looking for artists, they were looking for, like, high school graduates who could show up to a job and do the same thing 100 times, like, it wasn't like a high level
Right.
skilled job to start out, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was cool because it was the the launch pad that, like, kind of forced me to put in the time and effort to just learn a new physical skill. Like,
Mhm.
I also got really good at using power tools, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's kinda cool. It was very non-artistic, but the exposure to the machinery gave me the ability to kind of really explore my
Mhm.
own creative outlet with it.
Yeah, that's so cool, and yeah, like you said, that muscle memory, especially with free motion or graffiti style quilting is so important because you have to know how to, like, come into making some of those shapes and not have to, like, think about it too hard because you have to know where you're going and know where you're gonna come out and where you're gonna end, how you can loop that into the next set of
Right,
designs, like, I
right.
mean, I just use my computer because, but
That's
but
fine.
I've
That's its own
tried.
art form. I feel like using computerized designs is just a whole different, well, not different, but, like, it's just a subset genre that I think takes quite a bit of skill too. So,
It truly does, and, like, even digitizing designs, because you have to still think about
mhm.
those factors, like, "Oh, I don't want this area to quilt over itself 65 times before it's finished,"
Right,
like,
right.
you have to think through all those things, but, I just well, first of all, I wanna rewind and say I was that same crafty kid. I was mostly homeschooled until ninth grade, and then I went to public high school, but we always were crafting and making stuff, and
Mhm.
I same thing, I would, like, embellish my jeans or just spend time, like, adding my mom would have beaded fringe or just random stuff because she always sewed garments and, like, home decor things and wasn't really a
Mhm.
quilter until a couple of years before I was, but there was always stuff around, always fabric, always just notions and just things, and so I was always making stuff, like, in
Yeah.
when I got my braces off, I was, like, in 10th grade, and, um they offer, like, a portrait photo shoot as you get your braces off as, like, a little, like, perk, and then they hang your photo in their office with, like, "Oh, successful braces completion,"
Yeah.
whatever, and the jeans I wore in my picture had rhinestones along the pockets that I had, like, hand sewn on the night before because I was like, "I need these to be
Yes.
fancy." And, so just stuff like that. So when you're, like, saying, like, "Oh, sewing onto my buttons onto my backpack," and then I'm like, "Yeah, that was literally me just, like,
Yeah.
figuring out how to add, like, embroidery floss and, like, making, like, little stars and flowers and stuff all over my pants," and
Yeah.
anyway, so
Yeah,
yeah.
I think my parents and maybe your parents too were catching on to the same thing. Like, I was raised in a kind of inner city area,
Mm,
and now I look back and I think, like, how true it was where they say, like, "If you teach your kids to craft, then they'll never have money for drugs." And I'm like,
exactly.
"That was me. I'm probably
Yeah,
drug free because all the money that I earned, I was spending on the craft supply store."
right? It's like, I wanted to go I'm like, "Can we go to Joann Fabrics this weekend?" And, like, "I need new fabric for this," or whatever. I, like, started getting really into batik, and, back when, like, it wasn't as popular. I mean, I don't know, it was popular, but I think it was more like, "Oh, this is so cool," like, early 2000s, I don't know.
Mhm,
Anyway,
mhm.
so I had, like, made my mom buy me a bunch, and I was, like, jeans that just didn't fit anymore, that I just didn't like anymore, I would, like, cut out the
Mhm.
inseam and have her fill it with,
Yeah.
the batik and make skirts out of it, and, like,
Yeah.
that was, like, my jam for a minute, and, like
I know. It's like now jean skirts are kinda coming back, and I'm like,
like,
having
"No."
PTSD flashbacks about it, like,
Like,
please
"Stop,
stop. Yeah.
stop it." Yeah, so funny, and I don't think it's sad that you feel like you had to make some noise or, like, you know,
Mhm.
get seen because that's a lot of kids, and it's your
Yeah.
parents are just 2 people, and they only have so much attention and only so much brain capacity to deal with
Right,
their
right,
their individual selves on top of 8 others, and so
right,
I I think that's just how it is, and it's that way in a crowd anyway too, it's like if you're quiet,
right.
you're not gonna get noticed, and so
Yeah.
I just think about, birth order dynamics and just things like that, especially when you're that close together.
Mhm.
I'm the oldest of 4, and my sister is 15 years younger than me, and so I was, like, leaving for college when she was 3, it's like
Wow, yeah.
and like, we're super close now and, like, have such a strong bond, and we're best friends, but it's just different because it was, like, me and my one brother, and then we're just, like, super close, like, a year apart, and then our other brother is 10 years younger than me, and then my sister's 15 years younger, so it wasn't like we were being obnoxious teenagers while my mom was raising toddlers, It's like
Yeah, yeah.
so
Yeah, and for us, it was like the older ones raised the younger ones. Like,
Mhm.
number 1 and number 4 are partners, and number 2 and number 5 are
Yeah.
partners, and but, one thing that I think was good about that was, like, I think it taught me from a young age kind of how to, um, like, collaborate and have to get along with other people because it's like, I didn't get my own room until I was 16.
Mm,
And then I got married when I was 18, and now I still share a room.
yeah.
Like,
You're like, "Man."
yeah. So, I mean, like, things like that, like, I think there was good parts about it, and I think sometimes, like, um, learning how to focus on myself because I didn't have, like, parents who constantly focused on me,
Right.
So I think that was another I don't know if you would call it a blessing or if you would just call it a matter of the circumstance of what ended up happening, but, I do think, like, my independence, that kind of helped me in that way, um,
Mhm.
yeah, with such a large family, and I think
Yeah.
that I am an extrovert. I feel like I'm a loud introvert, like,
Mhm.
I can be an extrovert and I enjoy people, but then
Yeah.
I also really value and appreciate when I have my own, like,
Mhm.
recharge time.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's a good skill to have to be able to, like, be in a group of people and make connections and, not be afraid to kind of just get to know other people
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. So I think it's a good like, I'm happy to be able to do that now. So,
Yeah, you can kinda straddle both worlds, and I think the more self-aware you are of just, like, your own needs, it's easier to go, "Oh, I can turn this on now, and then later I'll, make sure to give myself time," and, I think some people can kinda get stuck in that, like, "Oh, I was so young, I didn't get a lot of attention from my parents," or whatever, and it's like, that's fine, some people really need that, but I think if you can, like, change your perspective and just look at it as you are, it sounds like,
mhm.
just like, "No, it actually taught me how to be independent and also work with other people at the same time," and, like, I think that's I think that's awesome because I think it is valuable to be able to do that, to be
Yeah,
independent and but also value your alone time and get to know
yeah.
yourself, so that's
Yeah,
really cool.
which and I think that also serves me well now because in the grand scheme, I think of the quilting industry, it is a very social, like, connective place,
Mhm.
but I think long arming in general is a little more isolating.
Absolutely.
In the sense that, like, you're at your own machine, you can't just pack up your long arm and take it somewhere with you, and
No.
even, if you have people over for, like, a sew-in or whatever, it's hard to
Mhm.
stand at a machine and run it because it's noisy, and so I think having both of those things is really nice because there are times when being at my quilting machine just, like, feeds me individually in a way
Mhm.
that's so different from the connective stuff. It's more like my long arm is the place where I have time set aside to connect back with myself, which I've
Yeah.
also found to be more valuable than ever as I've gotten older, like, being able to sit with myself, sit with my thoughts, and then also find ways that I can, like, kind of mentally connect again. And it's
Mhm.
interesting how, like, what my body is physically doing while I'm quilting, it's like it's like the muscle memory kicks in so much that, like, my brain can like, kind of enter these different places of thought and contemplation
Mhm.
while my hands are moving,
Mhm.
and I find that very therapeutic.
Mm.
So, I think that's really cool too, to kind of straddle both of those now in the quilting world, like, being on Instagram for 4 hours a day and, like, loving all of that connection and loving, talking to people and making funny reels and
Yeah.
seeing people's funny reels and like commenting on things, and
Mhm.
sometimes like seeing the quilty drama that's going on. Like it's very like bouncy, right? Like
Mhm.
things bouncing off of each other. And then
Mhm.
there's the other side where like I'm at my quilting machine and I'm stepping away from what however I fit into like a bigger picture. I
Mhm.
can pull my little puzzle piece of myself out and put it into this different thing that's like, how do I fit into the grand scheme of like my own uh like ethos
Mhm.
of this thing that I love to do so much. And I think that's really awesome and really valuable to have that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, and you're right, long arming gets isolating, but I think if you can get to a point where you're practiced enough at it that you don't have to think so hard about itself, like,
Yeah.
even with the
Yep.
computerized stuff, I mean, especially with that, because like I said, and it runs, but it's like I still have to be attentive to it, and so I can
Mhm.
do other things, but most of the time I just end up sitting there watching it and, like but again, I
Mhm.
can, like, head into another headspace or even if I'm, like, setting for the next zone or whatever, it's like I've done
Right.
it so many times that I
Mhm.
don't really have to think about it too
Yeah.
hard, and, you know, obviously custom stuff is more requires
Right.
more brain space, but if I'm just running an
Right.
edge to edge, it's like it's kinda
Mhm.
nice, like, yeah, meditative, like, therapeutic time to just, like, zone
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
that's one thing that I really love about graffiti quilting is it's also kind of a good middle ground because with graffiti quilting, you don't have to plan out every single step of your quilt. Like
Yeah.
that was something that was so scary for me when I first started quilting was like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, and everything was laid out
Yeah.
to get you to whatever the pattern photo looked like, right?
Mhm.
And that would scare me so much because what if I mess up on, step C, then step F is not going to work. And that gave me a lot of fear. And so when I started doing my graffiti quilting style, I really
Mhm.
loved that I could literally plan out just enough to get going, to like get that push forward.
Yeah.
But then as I was taking that journey, I didn't have to know all of those steps
Yeah.
in order to finish my quilt. And I really love that too. So I find that really meditative where it's like very free flow and free form,
Mhm.
but you're doing it within the confines of like kind of these simple guidelines that set you up so it's like you're on a path, but you don't have to manually be like, now another step forward, now another step forward. It's like, no, I'm walking. I don't know what every little angle is going to look like, but I can enjoy the journey just as much as I enjoy the finished product.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So did you start with, like, trying to plan out all the quilting, like, when you would make a quilt, would you make a quilt top and then try to plan out the quilting on it, and that's kinda where you were, like, finding the frustration point, or was it more just, like, you just didn't wanna go through that process, and so the graffiti idea came about?
so I think it came about a couple of ways. I think half of it was truly just me taking all of the drawings that I had done and
Mhm.
applying them to fabric and thread.
Mm,
So the thought of like piecing and finding a pattern and doing all of that, it just didn't exist because I was so used to working with like a blank canvas or a blank sheet of paper that when I translated it to quilting, that translated as a blank piece of fabric. And
sure.
so there wasn't really a huge motivation to incorporate like the fabric and the piecing and the pattern design and the cutting and the pressing and all of that because to me that was just like a barrier between me and the quilting machine
Mhm.
to try to get to that point.
Mhm.
um so I think that was definitely a part of it that was very different than traditional quilting in the sense that because I had learned how to free motion quilt on a quilting machine
Mhm.
before I really learned and understood, like, the techniques of piecing.
Sure.
And so, because I had already fallen in love with quilting, I struggled to find the motivation to go back and piece something to then quilt,
Right.
when, to me, the piecing got in the way of the quilting.
Sure.
So that was kind of like the half of it. And then I think the other half of graffiti quilting was really born out of, like, this, uh rebelliousness.
Mm.
Like, so imagine like, 18, 19-year-old Carly, freshly out of high school, freshly married. plunged into the deep end of the quilting world by working for a large company, like I was seeing and experiencing all of these things from a very like the opposite end of the spectrum. Like it wasn't just like, oh, hobbyists and like a friend who also quilts and you learn it together. It was like I would show up for work and I would see these quilts hanging on the walls that were like prize winning quilts. And I
Mhm.
was seeing quilts from like some of the people who work at HandiQuilter doing education who like they're all about like precise pinpoint seams,
Yeah.
and all of that was very to me felt like whoa, it was like a bright light opened all at once. It wasn't like this slowly dimming of understanding quilting. It was like, let me just throw you in the deep end and you're
Mhm.
going to get a lungs full of quilting.
Yeah.
And then I had to like slowly start to pick out and take the things that I like and leave the things that I didn't. But I found that like so like kind of a facet of that was like, oh, quilt guilds exist. There's like Fight Club for quilters. And so that was kind of something that was really intriguing to me, like finding a sense of community and what that looked like. And
Mhm.
um so it was like, oh, you join a guild. Like that's just a thing you do when you become a quilter. And so, I look up online and find the guild that's geographically closest to me. Only to pretty quickly figure out that like not all guilds are created equally
Mm-mm.
and they are all very different. And what works wonderfully for someone might be a complete nightmare for someone else.
Yeah.
And so like no disrespect to, some of the guilds that I have participated in, but it was very apparent to me pretty quickly which ones were like my tribe and which ones weren't.
Mhm.
And that was okay. But through that process, when I would start showing people, like I would take, a quilt to show and tell for guild meeting,
Mhm.
it became apparent very quickly where I was not fitting into the box
Mm.
of what it meant to be a good quilter. And so when I started doing graffiti quilting more and more, a lot of that was like, okay, so people are telling me that there's all these rules. I need to understand the rules, but some of them I'm gonna break just because it's really fun to watch these like perfectionist ladies watch their eyes twitch when they see my quilting because
Mhm.
it's breaking rules. Even though
Right.
I feel like I'm breaking rules very pragmatically and on purpose and mindfully.
Right.
And
Which
so it was fun. But I
right.
also found that the more rules that I broke, the more interesting and beautiful my quilts ended up being.
Yeah.
So so it was kind of that half and half where it was like I already existed outside of quilting and I brought that in and
Mhm.
applied it. But then the other half was um, kind of like reactionary
Mhm.
based on the feedback that I was getting from this very kind of at the time what I saw as kind of an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And so it's like all of these echoes were bouncing and hitting me and I started intercepting them and being like, "Hold up, wait, wait, wait. I'm
Mhm.
gonna deliberately, like, reject that, and I'm gonna show you why and how, and I can defend all of my reasons for why I break the rules, when, hair how, and where."
Yeah.
Um, and as I did that, as I kind of pulled back into, like, my intuitive artistic
Mhm.
abilities, that my quilting started getting more and more noticeable,
Mm.
and people started to take higher notice or not higher notice, but more notice of it. So,
Yeah.
but it was fun because I mean, a lot of those times people were having like the reactions were very polarized. People either
Mm.
loved it or they
Mhm.
like were very vocally in opposition. So like for instance, so this quilt that's hanging on my wall right here.
Yeah.
So this is one of my this was like the very first graffiti quilting quilt that when I made it, I
Mhm.
knew that there was, like, something more to what I was doing than just, like, "Oh, doodly type fun free motion." So
Mhm.
this is called I just have it called Mini Graffiti Quilt, and it was, like, the first one, and it's, for those of you who have seen my first graffiti quilting book that was published in 2014, it's the cover quilt
Okay.
on that book. So, I took that quilt to guild meeting, and the reaction this is the reaction I got. So I walk up there and I'm like strutting my stuff, feeling all
Yeah.
good and feeling all confident because I'm proud of my work. Like I was
Yeah.
really proud of this quilt. It was like, whoa, there is something here, you
Mhm.
know. And so I hold it up, and the lady in the front row goes, "Oh my gosh, that is such a waste of thread." I
Shut your
know.
mouth, ma'am. Oh my
And I was
gosh.
like, "Hold up, wait." Like I had
Yeah.
like a Cartoon Network double take, and
Yeah.
I was like, What a waste? Like that's pretty
Those are some strong
like
words, ma'am.
yeah, like all right."
What?
So I said like, Waste of like did I hear you right?" And she's like, "You could have quilted a whole king size quilt with how much thread you used on that little fat quarter." And I was like,
I didn't want to.
yeah. So I was like kind of just taken aback by it. And I said, "Well, the reason I overstitched that much is so that I could get those crisp, dark, rich, high contrast lines. Like, this is
Yeah.
a whole cloth quilt. It's just a plain white piece of fabric. All of the fun comes from the quilting. And to get the quilting to stand out, I had to stitch and stitch over it and stitch over it again."
Mhm.
So, like, there was a reason for that. And she's like, "Well, you're not supposed to overstitch. You're not supposed to let your line cross over because it makes the quilting more dense. And also, if you wanted a thicker line, you should have bought a different weight of thread. They make all kinds of different weights of threads for thick or thin." And I was like, "Yeah, well, did you forget the fact that I'm like 21 and have zero budget for quilting because I'm just some newlywed that lives in a basement with a husband who's in school full time? So
Right.
did you think about that when you were thinking about your move?"
Ugh.
So it was like that was one of the strongest, like, reactions that I have had, both in both ways, the
Right.
reaction from the viewer and then also, like, the way it hit me.
Mhm.
And so I think just part of my, like, rebellious nature or, like, my, like, competitive, combative nature,
Yeah.
I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna do it again." Like, on The Office when Michael is dating Pam's mom and she's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Stop dating my mom." And he's all, "I'm gonna date her harder." Like, that's
Yeah.
how I felt.
Yeah.
I was like, "I'm gonna just overstitch harder." And then the
Yeah.
next month, I brought another quilt and I held it and watched her eye twitch in the front row because
You're
she
like,
was like,
"Say something, I dare you."
yeah, like just having a conniption fit that I was like wasting thread, which is like, I don't know.
Ugh. Yeah.
So, but it's funny because, like, there was that generational gap, right? Like, she had probably been raised by a mother who, like, had experience with, like, rations and, like,
Right.
actual wastefulness. Like, I can understand
Yeah.
her her rationale for saying what she said in terms of waste.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
get it, and so it's not like I am making any sort of comment on her. It's just
Right.
the comment on her comment. Like, her
Right.
comment was crazy, and
Well,
so
and a
I'm
lot
gonna,
of
like,
times,
call
like
it out.
yeah, and comments like that usually are just like it's a reflection of how she's feeling on the inside. Probably had nothing to do with you. She's just seeing that and going, "Oh my gosh, I would never use thread in that way." Because in
Yeah.
her mind, she clearly has a judgment based on things that are in her environment. And like you said, she probably
Right.
has a mom who, or, somebody in her family who was very focused on saving and scrimping and like making sure
Right.
to use every bit of everything because the Great Depression was real and it
Right,
really
right.
screwed a lot of people's lives up, and, like
Yeah.
so, like, yeah, it's like you can see that, and it's like, if you have enough self-confidence to stand back and, like, think that way from
Mhm.
that perspective, it makes it a lot easier to like, because people are gonna say shit, and you're just like, "Okay, whatever." But
Yeah,
if you don't
yeah.
have a lot of self-confidence, it can really eat at you, but if you have enough
Right,
self-confidence and can take that different perspective and go, "I understand where you're coming from. I don't like it, but it's not gonna
yeah,
bother me because I know why I
yeah.
did what I did." And, like, just like you said, you made those choices deliberately and you know why you did them. It wasn't just like, "Well, I
Right,
messed up and so I just did this thing." It's like, no, you made a deliberate piece of art and that's not a waste. Like,
right, right.
woof. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, everything you're saying is right, and it's funny too because there are other aspects too of graffiti quilting that continued to incorporate deliberate rule breaking
Mhm.
that also informs the beauty and the aesthetic of the finished product. And so it's like kind of killing two birds with one stone in that way that like for me graffiti quilting like when I teach it to my students or when I'm doing it myself it's more than just trying to have a pretty quilt.
Mhm.
It's about like the journey of getting there and for me it's like this reminder that like something intrinsic and unique lives inside of me
Yeah.
and I can, like, let it come out organically without having to plan or force it or, like, grab it. But
Mhm.
then also every other person who quilts, like, that same thing is true for
Mhm.
them.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love being able to encourage that in people and say, like, "No, like, you have to create this thing because it will not exist without you,
Right.
and it has value, and it's beautiful," and I feel like when I was able to start standing up and saying that for myself, like, "No, like, these quilts exist because I took the time to, like, make them." I think that creativity is not just about expression,
Mhm.
but it's about expulsion.
Mhm.
It's about, like, there is something that actually exists. It's not thin air. Like,
Mhm.
there is energy there that
Yeah.
when you make a quilt, you're expelling that into something tangible. I call it, like, it's like spiritual alchemy to me,
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
like, I can look at this a quilt and hold it in my hands, and it exists when it was previously just like a thought or a concept or some sort of, like, energistic flow that
Yeah.
now is a tangible thing. Like, how cool that we can
Ye
transfer energy into, like, matter. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Yeah.
getting a little too hippy dippy, but I'm not sorry
No.
about it. Like,
Don't be sorry.
it's more than just like this craft
Yeah.
or more than this hobby or more than this utilitarian thing.
Right.
It's all of those things and
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, and it's not hippy dippy. Like, I truly believe that as well. Like, we're creativity begets creativity because there's an infinite number of things that can be made and an infinite
Mhm.
number of ways that things can be made, and we all have creativity inside of us, and you're right, it's like that energy that needs to come out, and whatever you make that exists because you made it is now this, like, product of your spirit and your brain and your consciousness all
Mhm.
coming together to, like, create this beautiful art that now
Yeah.
and now it gets to have its own life and its own
Right.
experience in this existence, and it's like, yeah, maybe
Mhm.
may seem like, "Oh, it's just an inanimate object," but, I mean, is it though?
Right. Well, and taking that one step further is that it passes hands. You
Mhm,
know, like, that is a hallmark staple characteristics of quilt making
mhm,
is gifting, right? Like, that's a huge part of it, is that not only did I feel the need to create this thing, but I took the time and the energy to do it because I needed you to hold it. I needed you to have it. I needed
yeah,
some sort of physical manifestation for you to hold me
yeah,
in that place, and
yeah,
that's just like another really beautiful aspect that's like, and I know that happens in lots of art forms. I'm not saying that, like, quilting has this monopoly, but
right,
it absolutely exists
mhm,
in quilting, and I'm here for it. Like,
yeah,
I have yet to find a different medium that I love more than quilting since I have found, out of all the mediums that I've done, since I have found quilting, and
yeah,
it's awesome. It's so cool.
it is so cool, it is so cool, and I think too, often people can get wrapped up in the idea that they have to piece something to be able to quilt it, and
Mhm.
but you don't, you can make whole cloth art, you can make a whole cloth quilt if you just wanna see a pantograph or, a design stitched
Mhm.
out on fabric, like, that's
Mhm.
worthy too, like, I think, in that same vein of, like, that lady's astonishment at your wastefulness, like, this old way of thinking, and that's honestly, like, where the title of my show comes from, is just that old way of
Mhm.
thinking of, like, "No, you must follow every rule, and you have to do it a certain way, and everything has to be correct, or you're not a real quilter," and
Mhm.
I love that, like, millennial women and men have decided to say, "Screw that, we're gonna change things. We have to, like, figure out how to grow up in this world of, like, those traditional ideas because our parents were raised with them and raising us with them while also getting all the messaging of, like, "You go girl," like, "boss
Mhm.
babe," like, "individual," like, "pay attention to your emotions," like, all these things, like,
Uh-huh.
that are so different from that, but also we were still raised in that traditional, more, like, way of thinking, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's an exhausting paradigm, like,
For sure.
it's exhausting. But I think if you can carve out a space in all of it that makes you happy, and allows you to the expulsion of your art creativity and the expression
Mhm.
of it. And, you know, just like you said, it changes hands and it's no longer, it doesn't belong to you anymore. Once you get it out into the world and share it, it's like, it's not just yours anymore. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, like all that to say, I think it's good to know the rules and where they came from and the traditional aspect of things, but I also think that it's really important to also say, I'm going to do this how it makes sense for me and like in the way
Mhm.
that speaks to my soul and my existence. Because yes, I love
Right.
piecing. I don't love piecing. It's actually my least favorite part of quilting. I love quilts. I really love quilts, but like I want to get to the long arming part. Like
Mhm.
I like when
Yeah.
the blocks are coming together and it's like, okay, I'm finishing it. And then once I can get it on that long arm, I'm like, oh
Uh-huh.
yes, this is what I
Yeah.
live for. So
Yeah.
like I can understand that. It's like, but I never think because I'm in that world where I'm like making quilts for people all the time and like just kind of getting through them to be able to get to the long
Mhm.
arming and like getting
Right.
excited for that part of it. It's like I
Right.
always forget for myself that like you can just like a fabric or it can just be
Right.
plain and you can just quilt on it. Like it doesn't have
Right.
to be this whole thing of like, oh, I
Yeah.
have to make a quilt now to use this pantograph. No, you don't. You don't
Yeah.
have to. And I'm like, this is a
Yeah.
note to myself. But anyway,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, I love the aspect of, like, the sharing, and,
Mhm.
that's another reason that I named graffiti quilting what I did, because the by nature, graffiti,
Mhm.
literally the sole purpose is to get it in front of the viewer,
Mhm.
right? Like, graffiti artists, street artists, they even forgo any sort of acclaim
Mhm.
or, or recognition
Mhm.
in exchange for just having something inside of them being seen. And
Yeah.
that really resonates with me too, of like, I feel like when I am creative, when I do visual art in whatever form that looks like,
Mhm.
and people appreciate it, I feel seen. And so I love that aspect
Yes.
too, because along with that, there's this very ephemeral state of it as well. That like the fabric that we have will not just be fabric forever. It will be cut and sliced and pieced and cut again and pressed and pieced and cut again.
Mhm.
And it becomes something new that
Mhm.
it's like, a fabric designer's like the person who picks the paint color, but then they don't have any control over where that paint is splattered. And
Right.
then I don't know. So I
Yeah.
love that too. And that's kind of all it kind of ties things in a nice little bow of like the aesthetic parts of graffiti quilting as well as the metaphorical parts of why and how it all kind of ties together. But I love
Mhm.
that. And I think that's a really valuable part of art in general is one, making it for the sake of it existing, and
Mhm.
then also being vulnerable enough to show it and allow people to like truly see it. Not just
Yeah.
look at it, but really see it and see you as a maker because that thing is intrinsically yours. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. I love
Yeah.
this.
So yeah, it's just I think sometimes people just don't know too that like quilting and fiber art in the quilting form is art. Like
Mhm.
it is functional most of the time, which is great. And but it's like it's functional art and but when you can make it solely from an artistic perspective of like, no, I'm going to hang this on a wall. It's not going to cover anybody's body, whatever. Like, I think that almost frees you up to explore more because I think when you're making
Mhm.
a quilt to be used, it's like, okay, if I over quilt it, then it's going to be stiff and it's not going to be comfortable and it's not going to drape or
Right.
wrap around my body the way I want it to. So it's like there are those kind of aspects that have to be considered in that realm of things. But if you're quilting it for the sake of the aesthetics of it, then it's like all those things go out the window and you don't have to really
Mhm.
think about that anymore, which I think again is freeing in that sense of like you're not restricted by the
Right,
that,
right,
use restriction of like, well, this isn't going to wrap around you because it's stiff as a board because I used 17
right,
spools of thread on it. But
right, right. Well, and what I aim to do is live inside of the Venn diagram between
mhm,
beauty and function,
mhm,
because I think that's even something still that is kind of common in the quilting world, that like either it's an art quilt or it's functional. But it's
right.
like I want to make quilts that are beautifully warm,
Mhm,
like having both of those things. And
yeah.
I think even like with free motion quilting, or like quilting on a functional quilt, but not just doing an edge to edge, right?
Mhm,
Like finding threads that will work for functionality while still being able to quilt them as much as I want to,
mhm,
or finding backing fabrics that can withstand a denser quilting so that the quilt is beautiful, but then it also is still warm. Like, I don't know how, and you guys can all have your judgments on this, but this is another thing I'm not sorry about. But one of my absolute favorite backing fabric methods is to go to Walmart and buy the fleece blankets.
yeah.
Like, so many of the quilts that I have are just those fuzzy fleece blankets,
Mhm,
and I can, like, quilt the crap out of my quilt top, like, really do some pretty dense quilting and still have it be so soft and fluffy and snuggly, and that's, like, my jam, that's where I live. That's,
yeah.
like, this thing is beautiful and it can hang on a wall. Like, so this quilt right here behind me is from my class called Lone Star Border Bliss, and it
Ooh,
is very densely quilted, but
yeah.
the backing of it is one of those really soft, fluffy backings,
Mhm,
blankets from Walmart, because
yeah.
they don't have seams and you can just throw it on your frame.
Mhm,
And so, like, when I'm not hanging this quilt behind me, it's in my bedroom and I'm
yeah.
like sleeping under it, and
Mhm,
so that's like the best thing that when I see that, that's like, you're not like, oh, this quilt just hung in a show. And now, like, I'm totally like just snuggling with the
yeah.
dog in my quilt.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that too, that like kind of bridging that gap, that there's like ultra functional, and then
Mhm,
there's art quilts that are like so stiff that you put them in a frame,
yeah,
and then it slowly morphs into the middle. And that's like where I
yeah,
try to live, is like, how can I make this functional quilt as beautiful as possible?
yeah,
Or how
yeah,
can I make this art quilt as snuggly as possible? And
yeah,
kind of have the middle ground, because I want both. Always. I always want both. Like, I
yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
have to pick between one and the other.
yeah, I don't think you have to, and you're proving that, it's like, again, back to that kinda old style or traditional kind of perspective on quilting, it's like, yes, they can be functional, not that they should be or shouldn't be, but, like, if you can marry the 2 concepts of art and function and, make a really beautiful quilt that you love and, yeah, wanna hang on the wall, but also can then turn around and snuggle in it if you feel like it,
Mhm.
then do that, like, I think, yeah, you can get wrapped up in the feeling of like, "Well, I just did all this quilting, like, I shouldn't wrap up in it. I shouldn't have it on the couch." It's like, "Well, why not?" Like, if it's done
Right.
well and your threads are
Right.
buried and everything's, like, together just fine, like, why shouldn't you, you know? A
Mhm.
quilt is still a quilt at the end of the day, so, yeah,
Right.
I think, yeah, I think it can kinda get sometimes easy to get stuck in one way or the other thinking, especially if you're not living in the middle as much, but,
Mhm.
I love to try to find that middle ground too and,
Yeah.
okay, where can the, like, aesthetics and, like, art of it come in, and then how else? Because like, I'm a Minky girl, I wanna put Minky on the back of
Mhm.
every quilt, and we sell it in our shop, so, of course, we have, like, bolts of it, and so I can just,
Yeah.
like, have Minky on whatever quilt I want,
Mhm.
um but again, like, I want it to be super soft and snuggly, and I've quilted really dense on Minky before, and it still comes out really
Mhm.
nice and cozy, and it's just, like,
Yeah.
same thing with those and, like, heck yeah, if you can get, like, a good cozy blanket for cheap, because Minky's not cheap, but
Right.
if
Right.
it's use what you can, use what you wanna use. I think that
Right.
policing
Right.
of materials too, it's like, no is like know how it's gonna interact because I think sometimes people want certain fabrics,
Right.
but it's like, that's actually not gonna work on my machine kinda situation, but, like, I'm not here to tell you
Right. Right.
that you can't use, you know, can't use a Walmart fuzzy, cozy blanket
Right.
as a backing, like, I've done it
Right.
for clients a lot, and it's
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's been a lot of times that that confusion of what is a actual rule and
mhm.
what is a quote, air quotes rule, right? Because it's like, okay, one rule in quilting that like it's a legit rule is like a quarter-inch seam allowance.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have a quarter-inch seam allowance, you're gonna have a bad time, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But then other rules that are like, oh, I only use blah, 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 whatever that is. Like, I'm not even going to give an example because everybody could fill in that blank with, I only use blah, 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 or my machine only likes blah, blah, blah. But it's like, eh, th- first of all, like technology is changing so quickly that the
Mhm.
thing that you thought was blah, blah, blah that wouldn't work,
Mhm.
chances are it probably works now. And
Yeah.
if you have a machine that can't handle blah, 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 you need a better machine. Like, I think like technology now for machine design
Mhm.
should be able to handle, like, basically pretty much any thread. Or,
Yeah.
like, needle technology, you should probably be able to quilt through any type of fabric, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, granted, it's not like a freaking cowhide that's, like, a
Yeah.
quarter inch thick or whatever, but,
Right.
like, the possibilities are so much more open than they used to be, and, I get this a lot when I talk about honest fabric. Our
Mhm.
custom printed quilt tops are all
Yeah.
polyester. And I think, like, almost any woman or man, any person that's, like, over the age of, like, I don't know, 55 might say, "Oh, polyester, oh my gosh, that's the worst. It's synthetic and gross and flammable and blah, blah, blah." And it's like, yeah, probably if it's made before a certain time,
Mhm.
it probably is all those things.
Right.
But, like, technology has come such a long, long, long way that, like, even the cotton that we have is not the same cotton that we had 50 years ago.
Right.
And the same is true for polyester, the same is true for thread, the same is true for, invisible thread versus fishing line. Like
Mhm.
it has changed so much. And so just being open to that and saying like I'm a huge proponent of saying like don't knock it till you try it.
Mhm.
And I feel like some of the quilts that I've made that I think are really cool and I'm really proud of have been like crazy materials that I was like, well, I guess we'll just see what happens. And if it sucks, I'll throw it away and never talk about it. And if it's awesome, then I'm gonna like brag and be like, look what I found at the sale rack at Joann's. It's like this crazy material that you would never throw in your quilts, but it's like awesome and works, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think like being open-minded about that. I think there's two facets too, because you can be open-minded, one about like what you're willing to try and what
Mhm.
you're willing to explore. And that's like, okay, pick your gauge, stick with it. Like if you're gonna be like, I only use X, Y, and Z, like more power to you. It's your quilt, you whatever.
Yeah.
But where my problem is when people say, "You can't do this," or "You can't do that,"
Yeah.
because it's like, "Bro, unless
Yeah.
you're paying me to quilt for you, like, you're not the boss of me. Like,
Yeah.
you're not
Like
my mom. Don't
the
try to
pol
tell me what to
yeah,
do."
yeah.
Like
I
like,
will
who
never call you mom. Yeah. Well, and that,
Yeah.
like, that whole, like, the quilt police or, like, that
Mhm.
policing other people's choices is, like, it's so out. Like, stop doing it. It's
Yeah,
none of your
yeah.
business what I
Stop trying
use.
to make it a thing. It's not gonna be a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, like, same thing. It's like, okay, for my business, here's the materials I use. And these are the things
Mhm.
that I know, like, I've worked with so many different materials and, you know, so many different combinations of things. And we make clothing quilts all the time and work
Mhm.
with different textiles all the time. So it's like we kind of see how different fabrics react on with being long armed or being put into a quilt with other types of fabrics. And there
Mhm.
happens to be one, I don't even know what it was, but somebody bring us this fabric that I think she had printed on spoon flower, but it was this like I think it was almost I don't even know what it was. It was like had 0 stretch in it. It was very thick and heavy, and it broke so many needles on our long arm because there was just no give in it whatsoever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that is kinda like I'm not gonna use that fabric ever. Like, please don't give it
Mhm.
to me. Don't I'm not gonna use it because it literally breaks needles and, like so
Right.
there it's like things like that where
Right.
it's not because I don't want you to be able to use it. It's like there are certain limitations here and there, but again, it's
Mhm.
like, yes, but I can make a quilt that's like all denim and
Mhm.
it quilts out just fine, you know?
Right, right.
But the
Yeah.
policing part is annoying, and, like, I think at first when I first started, like, getting into quilting and, like, before I really knew much about it at all, it was so easy to kinda get sucked into that, like, "Well, I only buy this kind of fabric, and if you buy fabric from this place, then you're cheap and shitty," and, like, kinda
Mhm.
got a snooty attitude, but the more I've learned and the more people I've met and just the more I've done my own kind of self-discovery and self-work, I guess, is just like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I need to stop that because it's awful." I want quilting and sewing to be more accessible to more people, and if you're
Mhm.
policing people and telling them that they're not a good quilter because they bought their fabrics at Joann's, like, who am I to tell anybody that? Like, I would hate if somebody
Right.
saw the fabric I bought and went, "Ew, you bought that from that place?" I'd be like, "Who are you?" So, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah,
um
that's I think another thing too, like, now that I've been in the industry for, I don't know, close to 15 years,
Mhm.
I feel like that's one thing that I've noticed about the industry that I feel like we have made so much good progress on.
Yes.
Like, being more open-minded, being more, um welcoming to
Mhm.
people and to different things, and I think really, like, social media helped that, and I think the internet, like, the way that technology or the way that information is dispersed through technology, like, it's come
Yeah.
so far
Mhm.
because, like, I remember the little, 20-year-old version of myself that was like I felt so I felt like a kid sitting at the dinner table where I had to have my elbows up to defend my food.
Yeah.
Which is, like, actually what I how I was as a kid, like,
Yeah.
you had to get all the food you wanted in your first helping because by the time you wanted seconds, it was gone,
Yeah.
like, I had this very, like, kind of scarcity mindset
Mhm.
for just the industry as a whole because I feel like I just had lots of experiences where I was basically being told that there was not room for me
Right.
or not room for my thoughts, my ideas, my opinions.
Mhm.
And that was really hard. It
Yeah.
really sucked. And I'm grateful to say that like my stubbornness and my rebelliousness and my like drive to be like I'm going to fit at this table, damn it. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to make a spot. I'm going to elbow my way through because I feel like a lot of times I really had to kind of elbow my way
Mhm.
through, but I feel like now I can kind of look behind me and in my wake, being able to say, like, I wasn't just saying, "Elbow, move out of the way for me." I was
Right.
saying, "Move, because we are coming through."
Right.
And it's not like we're like, it's not like I'm trying to take over something. It's about,
Right.
like, just recognizing that, like, we need to put some more leaves in the table.
Yeah.
And this table is, like, infinite, and there's
Yeah.
so much room. There's so much room for people that, like, this scarcity mindset, this Great Depression scarcity fear that
Mhm.
even though we're not living in the Great Depression, that, like, that generational mindset,
Mhm.
I have felt like there's been a lot of progress in the sense of, like,
Yeah.
we don't have to be scared anymore. We don't
Yeah.
have to be fearful. We don't have to be so like, we shouldn't be wasteful, but we don't have to, like, scrimp every stitch and
Yeah.
say, like, "Oh, I need to only use this amount," or, like, "I
Right.
need to stretch this and make this cone quilt 4 quilts instead of just 3." Like,
Yeah.
we don't have to live there anymore if we don't want to, and, like,
Right.
being able to switch to this abundance mindset is such a good, like, catalyst for helping other people feel that too, because
Mhm.
now it's like I used to be what I would consider quite an anomaly in the quilting world. To be a professional quilter in my 20s
Mhm.
was, like, unheard of. Like, it
Yeah.
was just very, very uncommon where I was, like there was a big, big, big gap
Yeah.
between me and the people that I would call my peers professionally,
Mhm.
but couldn't call my peers generationally,
Right.
and I'm just so grateful and happy to feel like that's not the case anymore, that it's like there's room for everybody, and it's cool that people are taking up space. Like,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
feels good to be like, "Okay, yeah, we're still on the younger side, but we're just kinda like the youngins." but
Yeah.
there's a bunch of us, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
And kind of like bridging these great relationships with women who, for very good reason, are very confident in their skills because they have been quilting longer than we've been alive. And like
Right.
that's valuable. And there's so much that we can learn from that too. So
Yes,
I don't
absolutely.
know. It's kind of
Yeah.
cool to look back on the last ten years and
Mhm.
be able to say what I'm saying because
Yeah.
I think that the 10 years ago version of me sometimes just felt so it was hard, you know? It
Yeah.
was hard
Yeah.
to not give up. So,
Yeah. Well, and you said
I
your book was in 2014, so your book
uh-huh.
is almost 10 years old. Like,
Yeah, so
what's
this
that feel
summer is the
like?
10 it's so crazy. Oh my gosh. It's blowing my mind. Yeah, so
Yeah.
this summer will be the 10-year anniversary from when I published my first graffiti quilting book.
Wow.
And it's insane. Like it's funny because I look back at that book and it was such a huge benchmark in my career. Like
Mhm.
2014, I published the book, and with pre-sales of that, I was able to quit my full-time job, buy my long arm quilting machine, and then the following summer of 2015, I did an international tour
Oh
teaching
gosh.
graffiti quilting. And
Yeah.
I did a southern tour across Australia. I went to England, Ireland, Scotland, a couple places in Canada, a few places statewide, all within like a 3.5 month span.
Holy cow.
It was so yeah, and I can't believe that that was almost 10 years ago that I did that. But yeah, so now I'm working on the 10-year anniversary graffiti quilting book that
Mhm.
is triple the size of the one that I did 10 years ago. So
Holy cow. Yeah, I was gonna
yeah.
say, like, I'm sure looking back too, it's like you knew a lot then, but it's like over this last 10 years of like honing your craft and really like leaning into it and being able to lean into it the way you have, like I'm sure there's
Mhm.
things where you're like, "Oh, I need to add this," or "I want to modify this better," or like clarify
Yes.
this piece and
Yeah.
like so that's
Yeah.
really cool that you can go back to it and revamp it and
Mhm.
just update
Yeah.
it to make it even more available for people like
Right, yeah. Well, and I had done that in, like, 2017. So, in in 2015 and 16, when I was doing my business full time and traveling and teaching and all of that, it was almost like when I published the first book, I didn't even know what I didn't know.
right.
Like, graffiti
Right.
quilting was just still marinating. Like, there was still so much that as I was traveling and teaching, every time I would teach, there was more that I was like, "Oh, this isn't in the book, but it should be."
Yeah.
And so in 2017, I did a second edition, and that had even more, which was great and wonderful, and continued to share that. And then over the next since from 2017 to now,
Mhm.
I was like, okay, 10 years, this is a big deal, but also I could easily triple the size of the book with more of what I've learned and more of how
Yeah.
I've been able to like uh vocabularize
Mhm.
what I've added.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's exciting. It's really cool, and I've been pouring my heart and soul into this new book for since last summer. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I'm really proud of it, and I think that people are really going to like it, whether they like to do graffiti quilting on every quilt or if
Mhm.
they just are really trying to expand their free motion quilting skills in general.
Yeah.
Um, I I don't like to toot my own horn, but I actually do because this is, like, my one horn in life that I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not good at very much, but, like, quilting and teaching and writing, that's, like, the one horn, so I'm gonna toot it, but
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be emotional thinking about how excited I am to present this because this is, like, the thing that's, like, I will, like, feel seen,
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited for it, and it's not even bittersweet, it's just sweet, and it's
Yeah.
exciting to feel like, um, so many people have been so supportive over the last 10 years, and this feels like a love letter back to all of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Gosh,
yeah, I'm really excited for it.
that's amazing. It's so cool. And yeah, like, yeah, it's like when you're doing something, you don't know what you don't know. And then when you learn more and you can just like add to that, it just feels so good. Like it feels so cool. Like having that new knowledge and being able to impart that on people. Like,
Mhm.
I've been long arming for a long while and a long while, like a few years, but then I was just kind of working part-time at a local quilt shop here, and they teach long arming, that's where I learned how, and you start with free
Mhm.
motion and following paper pantographs and all that, and so I
Mhm.
started teaching that class and being like, "Oh, yeah, I remember when I didn't know any of this stuff," like and just because I was an educator before, like, I went into quilting full time, I have that, like, kinda teaching background, and so as I was, like, preparing to, like, take over teaching this class, I was just like, "Oh my gosh," like, this is so crazy, and, like, knowing why, because like, I didn't really when I started learning a long arm, I'd only been making quilt tops for, like, a year, so I didn't really
Mhm.
have, like, a lot of time under my belt and a lot of knowledge, but now, like, because I know so much and because I've worked on with my long arms so much and learned so many things, it's like helping people see, like, the little details of, like, why things because again, with long like, setting up a quilt on a long arm, there's rules for a reason.
Mm. Mhm.
Because
Yep.
if you don't have enough
Yeah.
backing or if you don't have enough batting or it can be disastrous, but
Right.
like, getting to show people why, and if they had been quilting for a long time, it made it so much easier because I could communicate with them on a deeper level, and even if they weren't
Mhm.
pretty new to quilting, it was still like I had enough knowledge that I could then get on their level, and I think that's where my
Mhm.
teacher brain would take over, and, like, I knew how to get on their level with them and explain it in a way that would, like, help them see those details, but it was just, like it felt so good to kinda come full circle to, like, going from, like, taking the class and, like, all the frustration points I would have and all the things that would, like, get kinda just, like, get in my head and, like, make me, like, second guess myself. I'm like, "Okay, how do I
Mhm.
help people, like, not stumble on these same stumbling blocks?" Because now I know how to
Totally.
avoid them and, like so,
Yes.
like, it's not on the same level of having a cool ass book, but it's just that same feeling of, like, getting
Yeah.
to use what you know now that you didn't know then to
Right.
then
Right.
keep encouraging that skill and that learning for other people, and it just feels
Yeah.
like such a magical thing that we get to have in this world if, like, that's what
Yeah.
we take up, and so that's really cool, and so, um, staying on the vein of businessy things, so you have is it Honest Fabric?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so
honestfabric.com.
okay, and so you custom print quilt tops for people to do free motion long arm on top of? That's
Yes.
what that okay.
Yes.
Okay. I just briefly
Yeah.
looked into it, but I was like, "I'll definitely ask about it, obviously, on the show," so I was like, "I'll just get all the information directly from you," so but yeah,
Yeah.
tell me more about it, like, when did that come into your lineup of what you wanted to have going on for yourself? Like, what encouraged that?
So I think you touched on a good point in what you were just talking about. I think there's also this misconception that in order to learn how to quilt, you first have to learn how to piece.
Mhm.
And I am like living proof that that is not the case. Like
Yeah,
it's just not the case.
yeah.
But it is the typical workflow, right? Is that
Mhm,
like you pick a pattern, you learn how to piece it, then you probably either like domestic machine straight line quilted or you hand quilted or you take it to a long armor and pick
mhm.
out a pantograph. Like, that is obviously the entry
Yeah.
into quilting, the most common free way into quilting.
Yes.
Um, but like you were talking about that like the quilting and the sewing, the quilting and the piecing are not the same,
Right.
right? And so someone can be a phenomenal piecer
Mhm.
and a garbage quilter.
Yeah.
I happen to be the exact opposite. Like I I'm just going to be cocky because I'm allowed to be cocky on the one thing I'm good at. But like
Yeah.
sometimes I'll be at the machine quilting and I'll just stop and I'll just like go, man. And my husband from across the room will go, "You're so good at quilting, huh?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm so good at quilting." Like I continue like I feel good about this one skill that I really am proud of, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
But the same is not true for piecing. Like
Right.
I will piece something very simple and be like, "It lines up enough." Like like I don't have that sense of pride. And so um because I loved like quilting is my first and biggest love within the process of making a quilt from start to finish.
Yeah.
Um, there and I do have a graphic design background. Like I have an artistic background from childhood moving forward, and then I did
Mhm.
end up going to college technically to get a graphic design degree. And I found more and more often, all the time, that my taste and my aesthetic was much further ahead than my
Mm.
skills to make the quilt top.
Mhm.
And so there were so many times that I was like, "Oh, I wanna make a quilt that looks like this,"
Mhm.
but I couldn't applique it, I couldn't piece it. I don't necessarily want to paint fabric, like, I've done the painting fabric where your quilt is, like, crusty when you're
Mhm.
done, I've tried all of that, like, applying fine art supplies into
Yeah.
quilting, like, I've
Yeah.
I've been there and I've done that. But there was just this point that I was like, I have created this really beautiful digital piece of art. I want it to be a quilt, but I
Mhm.
don't have the skills or the technology to make it look how I want it to look with fabric. Like I
Mhm.
would not want to piece it. I would not want to applique it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So that's how Honest Fabric was born. It was kind of like I felt like there was this need in the quilting world, very small
Mhm.
need, but a need nonetheless,
Sure.
where there had to be other people like me who were thinking, I just want to get to the quilting machine. And like you're proof of it now that like that was you, that you were
Yeah.
like, for you, or maybe I won't speak for you exactly, but for me, it was like piecing was a means to an end to get to the quilting machine.
Mhm.
And so Honest Fabric became this like cheat code
Mhm.
that was like, can what's the least amount of work I can do to get a beautiful quilt to my quilting machine so that I can quilt it?
Mhm.
And so that's where custom printing large format pieces of fabric came from. So for instance, this quilt hanging on the wall right here,
Ooh.
yeah, it's, like, mind-blowing. So if you go on YouTube,
Mhm.
I made a video of this quilt. It's
Okay.
called the Royal Huntress. So
Okay.
if you wanna see the full Monty from start to finish on how I made that quilt, but that is a custom printed quilt top.
My
There's no
gosh.
piecing, there's no applique, there's no painting.
No, that's beautiful, and it just lets
Yeah.
you have so much fun with the threads
Yeah,
and, like,
with
making
the
it come to
quilting.
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in 2018 is when my husband and I launched this company. And what I really wanted to do was because I had kind of found the solution for myself. Like
Mhm.
I had found a printer that could print large format because I had printed with spoon flour
Mhm.
on cotton fabric.
Yeah.
But the size of my quilt required that I print 2 panels and then
Mm.
by some wizardry piece them together and make them line up, and that never happened because 'cause I'm not good enough to do that. So, I was like, and then also I just was not happy with the hand and the feel of digitally printed fabric on cotton. Like,
Mhm.
I just wasn't happy with it.
Yeah.
I don't think that cotton is the best substrate for digitally printing fabric. It's
Mhm.
just not. It doesn't have the same chemical composition to accept the dyes and to bind, or it was hard to find.
Mhm.
Or the particular quilt top that I had printed, that was just not the case. So there
Sure.
probably maybe is other cottons out there that are better, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so I had this quilt top printed and I didn't ever quilt it because getting the seam lined up to piece it, I didn't like. But then also I didn't want a seam straight down the middle of the front of my quilt.
Right.
And so I started searching for different printing companies and couldn't really find what I was looking for. And so as this concept started playing more and more in my mind of like, there's got to be like a way to do this.
Mhm.
When Honest Fabric was born, it was kind of my love letter to the quilting world that I felt like I had been in the industry long enough to kind of understand the needs and the niches that exist there.
Yeah.
And so Honest Fabric was founded on 3 pillars, which are being fair trade,
Mhm.
American made, and eco-friendly.
Mm.
So, and they all kind of address different areas of the quilting industry that I was hoping we could do a little better with. So,
Yeah.
like being fair trade, I had looked into like doing a line of fabric, designing fabric, to fairly quickly realize that it's not a super lucrative part of the industry. I mean, there's
Mhm.
a lot of saturation, right? Like there's lots of designers who want to do fabric. And so these fabric companies don't really have to compensate competitively
Mhm.
because there are just lots of people who want that notch in their belt. Um, and so I wanted to give designers a platform where their artwork could be licensed, but do it in a way that's cost effective while still being fair to those designers. Like I wanted them to actually be able to feel like their work is being compensated fairly.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we kind of pride ourselves with Honest Fabric is that we feel like the compensation for any time their artwork is used, they get paid um comparatively to like if you were to sell a paper pattern or a
Mhm.
piecing pattern, it would be
Yeah.
similar. So it's like every time their fabric sells, they get a royalty from anywhere from like $8 to $25. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
Wow.
comparable to if they design a pattern for
Yeah.
piecing, they could also license that same pattern as a
Mhm.
custom printed quilt top, and they would hopefully make around the same
As
margin
if they
for their
sold.
work.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. That's
So,
awesome.
but the beauty of that is that if some like I see so many patterns that I'm like, that's beautiful, but I'm not ever going to piece it. Like
Yeah.
it's just not in my cards to piece it.
Yeah.
But if I can have it printed because what I want to do is quilt it and interpret it,
Mhm.
then if it's on Honest Fabric, I can do that. So that's really cool because it kind of helps pattern designers get a little bit more, just another revenue stream that could possibly help them recoup all of their work for the pattern that they've designed anyway.
Yeah.
So that's so being fair trade, that's kind of how we we justify that.
Mhm.
Um, and then being American made, our drop shipping company that prints for us is here in the States, which is great. I think any
Nice.
jobs that we can try to bring as close to home as possible is a good thing.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
the fabric pieces that they print on, unfortunately, are not sourced in the United States, but all of the work from the printing to the shipping to the delivery is all um, US based, which is cool.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
like I don't have a ton of control over things being American made fully, but it's
Right.
something, that it's like if we can support a US based company that can help us provide products with
Yeah.
a much quicker turnaround time. Well,
Right.
I guess it's kind of relative because it is still custom printed, so there is delay time for that. But
Right.
anyways, it's like I don't feel like we're hurting by trying to be American made.
Yeah.
And then eco-friendly. That was another part of the industry that I felt like was a very kind of old mentality that it's like whoever dies with the most fabric wins. And I'm like,
No.
like you guys are the same people that yelled at me for using too much thread, and now you're going to pass down an entire sewing room of obsolete fabric to your kids to deal with.
Right.
Like,
Right?
so I was like, it bothered me the like consumerism that's like, oh, I'll buy it and then figure out how to use it later.
Right.
Because in the meantime, to have that luxury means that every quilt shop has bolts and bolts and bolts and bolts and bolts of fabric that may never get sold.
Mhm.
That means bolts and bolts and bolts and bolts of fabric that were printed and exist that may never get used.
Mhm.
And I didn't like that. I felt like, oh, if I don't know.
Yeah.
So with Honest Fabric, everything is printed on demand. We don't print, I mean, other than like we'll do some marketing promos and we'll print stuff to have in house or
Sure.
for whatever. But we
Yeah.
don't keep stock of everything that we offer. It's not printed until it has a home to go to. And
Right.
so that's our eco-friendly portion of why we use that as our platform is because we are not overproducing and then hoping that it'll sell later.
Yeah.
We offer as much as we can. We let the designers upload as many designs as they want in a bunch of different colorways, and we test whatever they want. And some things will sell really well, some things might never sell, but those things that never sell also don't exist in a physical form,
Right.
and they're not filling landfills, they're not using fabric, they're not using ink, they're not using water.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of a passion project for me to like, I feel like I've had opportunities while working in the industry where I've had people who have helped me kind of stand on their shoulders in different
Yeah.
ways, like
Yeah.
when I started doing digital designs, I
Mhm.
didn't have a website of my own, and I was just, like, emailing these other websites and saying, like, "Hey, will you be my pimp?" And they're like, "Yeah, nobody knows who you are, but sure."
Mhm.
And they started and so I wanted to be something like that for other designers too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's Honest Fabric, and we could get more into, like, the whole polyester versus cotton if you wanted to, but all of our fabrics are polyester poplin blends, and
Mm.
they're beautiful. They're very soft. Like, this is a cool one. This was a really popular design a couple of years ago, um, and this is a custom printed quilt top.
Oh, I love that. All the bugs. And they're all
Yeah.
rainbowy. Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So it was kind of fun because for me personally, one of my biggest motivators was I felt like I had a lot of art to offer
Mhm.
that just what wasn't a pattern. It
Right.
wasn't like a piecing pattern. So
Right.
to be able to kind of um repurpose so much of my own artwork and then cuz like I feel like it's common that in life,
Mhm.
quilters will see something outside of the quilt world and be like, "That should be a quilt. Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
that looks like a quilt. Like, I love that tile, it should be a quilt." I was
Yeah.
constantly feeling that, and there were even designers that have nothing to do with quilting
Mhm.
that I was like, "I just want your artwork as a quilt. Can I, like, just license it and I'll pay you anytime it sells?" And they're like, "Sure." Like, they have nothing to do with quilting,
Yeah.
but now quilters have access to beautiful artwork that is non-traditional to what we're normally seeing in the industry because they're from designers who have a much bigger scope of
Yeah.
visual art than just like, "Would this be a good quilt?"
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of like
Wow.
the honest fabric spiel.
Yeah. That's incredible because I think you're right, like, there's so much cool art out there and so many designs that exactly, like, as a quilter, you see it and you go, "That should be a quilt." Well,
Mhm.
again, if it's something that would be super complicated to piece or you'd have to sit and plan it out and do all the quilty math, and for some people, that's exactly their jam, and that's what they would do with
Mhm.
it, and that's fantastic. But for
Right.
some of us who don't wanna sit and try to design a pattern to be pieced to just be quilted when I just wanna do the quilting part kinda thing, like, yeah,
Mhm.
that's amazing,
Yeah,
and I think the more sustainably we can do this, the longer we'll be able to quilt, the less
totally.
we as quilters will be economically impacted, and I think that's where I think I've noticed a lot of people going, and I love is that they're repurposing things or they're finding new ways
Yeah.
to salvage threads out of old clothing or
Mhm.
jeans and use it in something else, or like kind of that perception of like, oh, you have to have all new fabric all the time is starting to kind of fade away now to more of like, and maybe it's just how I've curated my online experience, but I am seeing more
Mhm.
people using what they have, using their resources, and trying to be more mindful about where they're sourcing their
Yeah.
stuff. I really
Well,
love
and
that.
I think another part that's really cool about Honest Fabric being, eco-friendly is
Mhm,
that because by nature of it being a whole cloth quilt with
mhm.
no piecing, there's no seam allowance and there's no waste,
Right.
like, for instance, foundation paper piecing, I love the aesthetic,
Mhm.
but it's very, very hard for me personally to wrap my head around doing it because I look at how how many scraps, like, it yields, like
Yeah.
and so that's always been kind of a struggle for me too that, like and I think that's my own upbringing of,
Mhm,
like, my mom thinking, like, any fabric that's more than $3 a yard is expensive, like, that
mhm.
was where I was raised
Yeah,
in that space.
yeah.
And so throwing things away is really hard for me. And
Mhm.
because I know that it's hard for me, I am much more picky about what I bring into my space, knowing that if I had to throw it away, like what is my level of how much crap I'm willing to throw out?
Right.
And if that level's low, that means my stash needs to reflect that too.
Right.
And that's what I feel like makes it like respectful and responsible
Right.
is like being more mindful and not just s- so so high consumption.
Mhm,
So being more
mhm.
picky about what I bring into my stash and pulling from it and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I do also recognize that, like, there's probably many people listening that are like, "Okay, well, we're not like you. We like to piece. Like,
Yeah.
who cares?" And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine too. This is
Right.
just one lady's opinion, one
Right.
person's opinion on because we're all going to have consumption and waste in
Mhm,
art. Like,
mhm.
art will yield some sort of excess.
Yeah.
Happens with paint, it happens with brushes, it happens with every single tangible art, there will be waste. There will
Right.
be collateral damage.
Right.
And so just choosing for myself what I want that to be for me, and this is what has kind of come out of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm happy with it. I like it. I like the convenience aspect that like if someone who's a non-quilter really wants a quilt from me, but they are like, I only want to pay $400, then I'm like,
Mhm.
you know what? I actually have a solution for you. Go to this website, pick your favorite one, tell me the size, and I will do it within your budget. And I can just
Yeah.
print it out, quilt it, and give it to them, and they're so happy with it because
Right.
that's the level that they want, and so there's that aspect too that's like, I get to quilt more often and finish more quilts
Yeah.
because I'm quilting on custom printed quilt tops. So, I don't know,
Right.
I think it might be a very niche audience that finds value from Honest Fabric, but even if it serves just one designer as a platform to help them share their portfolio or
Mhm.
be seen and heard, or even if there's just one customer who finds value, then it will have done its job. Like, I
Right.
went into launching that company saying, like, "This is really just a love letter. This is something that I hope will benefit and raise the tide of the community. This
Yeah.
isn't like a get rich quick scheme for me.
Right.
It's just a platform that I can pay it forward when I'm bumping elbows and pushing people. It's
Yeah.
so that I can do this and say, 'Come on in,'" you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It opens the door for yeah, for so many more people to quilt when they wanna quilt, because I think I do get frustrated with the piecing because it's keeping me from getting to the the quilting, and so
Right. Right. Yeah.
and I love to make large quilts. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm not super tall, but I'm 5'8", and my husband's 6 foot, and so it's like we want quilts that are gonna cover our bodies. Like, I don't want
Mhm.
the fight of, like, if I pull it up to my chin, it like, comes off my feet, and if I pull it back over my feet, it comes down, to my belly. Like, I want to
Right.
be covered. So
Right.
that's another aspect that's like, I would just piece together a lot of half square triangles, or just, like,
Mhm.
just so a big patchwork because I just wanted a quilt top, and
Yeah.
um so yeah, I
Well, and
love
the
that.
other
Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say another thing that alleviates the fear with
Mhm.
quilting is that you haven't spent 100 hours on a top only to
Exactly.
ruin it with your quilting. Because
Yeah.
I think that's a huge fear or a huge barrier of fear for people who love to make quilt tops but are so scared of these machines
Mhm.
because it's like, what if it eats my quilt?
Yeah.
And so, that's another thing that's really nice is like the custom printed quilt tops are priced so competitively that you couldn't make the same quilt top for cheaper than you could purchase it.
Right.
Um, and I
Yeah.
think it just alleviates a lot of fear. Like, we have some designers who are free motion quilting teachers who routinely have honest fabric tops for their students
Mhm.
so that their students can just like wrap their head around not being afraid and just
Yeah.
jumping in and doing it. And
Yeah.
the nice little perk is that when they're learning how to quilt, they're also not dealing with any bulky seams, which
Right.
is a bonus.
Yeah. Well, and that's how the
But
quilt shop would do it. We would give people their kits to learn how to quilt on, and it would just be 2 solid pieces of fabric so that they
mhm.
could just see their stitches, and we'd use high contrast thread so that they could see their stitching on their
Yeah.
fabric, and, you know, see what that looks like and just get the feel of it. And some people are like, "Oh my gosh, even if I wanna come rent time, like, I could just bring in, like, blank pieces of fabric and just quilt on 'em." I'm like, "Yeah, you can quilt.
Yeah.
That's still quilting." They were like, "Oh," it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
that concept. But you're right. It's like, I think, yeah, people are scared to long arm it themselves or quilt it themselves because they're so scared they're gonna ruin this thing they just spent so much time and money on. And I get that. Like, when I was first long arming, I was like, "What if I fuck this up? Like, I'll be so mad at myself." And
Mhm.
I everything is fine. But
It's like a real legitimate fear though.
yeah,
Like, and
yeah,
and that's not even a quilting fear, like that's an art fear
yeah,
too.
absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
when you spend so much time on the base of a piece of art and
Mhm.
then you're like, "Oh crap, now I got to do an overlay of painting or I got to do whatever that next step is."
Yeah,
There's real trepidation there. And
yeah,
so to be able to overcome that is valuable. It's
yeah,
really, really valuable. And there's
yeah.
nothing better as a teacher to see students be brave in that
Yes.
way. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a jump in the deep end. It doesn't have to
Mm-mm.
be a cliff dive into the deep end.
Right.
Like, we can wade together and get through it together, just one quilt at a time, just one stitch at a time. But
Yeah.
it does make it a lot less scary when you haven't spent 100 hours putting your bathing suit on
Yeah.
just to learn how to quilt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. I like that. And yeah, it's any points that, like, those of us who have the ideas to do it can make having a quilt or creating a piece of art more accessible to people, I think it's our duty
Mhm. Yeah,
to make
yeah.
that happen because it's like if you have the know-how and the willingness to get the know-how and the drive to make it happen and make it available, then I think, it's kind of a humanly responsibility to like open that avenue. Like you said, elbow the room, like elbow
Mhm.
out the room so that you can then move aside and let more people come through. And so
Mhm.
I love that you took that responsibility and saw that need and that want in the quilting community and brought it to life for people so that they don't exclude themselves from creating the art that they want to create. Because I
Yeah.
think that's where I think the sustainability piece is coming from too, is like people still want to make quilts, but they also don't want to feel like they're stuck in that trap of like, well, I'm not using the latest Ruby Star, so this quilt is garbage. It's like, no, 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 no. No.
Mhm.
Like, yes, I love Ruby Star. Don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
Some of my favorite fabric on the planet. But if you can't get that, if it's not in your budget, or because I mean, it's not the Great Depression, but there has been a lot of economic impact on people in the last 5 years. And
Totally.
it's,
Yeah.
everything is more expensive and people aren't making more money,
Right.
to match that rise in living costs. And so,
Mhm.
like luxury items like brand new fabric feel crazy when you're barely making rent or barely
Right.
able to feed yourself because you're paying rent or vice versa, whatever.
Mhm.
So anywhere we can cut corners and help people keep creating, I think it's a noble pursuit. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
keep finding ways to keep people involved and get them creating and making the stuff they want to make. So
Yeah.
it's it's
Yeah. And
fantastic.
I think to that point too is that, like, I think the responsibility can be, big,
Mhm.
not because we need all of these finished quilts,
Mhm.
but because those people need to make those things, you
Mhm.
know? It's not about the end product, it's about helping people connect with themselves in a way
Mhm.
that they can then look at that thing and say, "Holy shit, I made this."
Yeah.
And I'm proud of it. Or even if I'm not proud of how it looks, I'm proud of the fact that I exist and that's why this thing exists, you know?
Right.
Like,
Like I
that's
tried
such a
something.
beautiful thing to teach people to recognize that intrinsic, like, divinely appointed energy that, like,
Yeah.
only comes from each person, and if they can harness it through quilting or through sewing or through piecing or through painting or ceramics or photography or yoga or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's a big but very cool responsibility to
Mhm.
be one of those people that's like, I can lead you because I've been where you've been,
Mhm.
and I'm happy to take your hand. Like, I'm happy to be a cheerleader in the wings of your journey
Yeah.
because I was lucky enough to have cheerleaders in my
Mhm.
journey. Or even if you weren't lucky enough, like, there are
Right.
lots of places that I'm like, "Man, I wish that somebody had taught me this thing. I had to
Mhm.
just figure it out on my own." But just because I had to figure it on my own doesn't mean you have to do it alone. And
Right.
that is a cool, like, "Oh, snap. It's like exponential growth that I get to pass on
Mhm.
from very, very little."
Yeah.
And I think there's a really, like, the not to, like, stroke my ego, but, like, that's really valuable to me. Like, it makes me feel good. I get a
Yeah.
lot out of it, and so I wanna keep doing it for selfish reasons, but I'm still doing it,
Right.
and, it's like a double dividend for both people.
Yeah. And I think, I guess you could view it as selfish, but in the long run, like I think the more we as people can see where like, oh, I wish I had that person and can become that person that we wish we had, like
Mhm.
it just helps. I think it just helps and it builds it can build a sense of community because you're now bringing yourself into these positions to be a cheerleader for people where you wish you had a
Right,
cheerleader. And
right,
now you're building these kind of like secure connections with people where there's trust, where maybe they were feeling alone and they were feeling lost and but you can get out of your own way enough to say, okay, well, I didn't have that, but I can now be that person. And so let me help you so that you don't feel alone like I did. And instead of
Mhm.
getting like kind of bitter about it, which I think some people can and they isolate, the more we can kind of open up and say, yes, and like, yes, that was how it was for me. And I'm going to add
Mhm.
to the community. Like,
Right.
yeah, sure, we get great satisfaction out of it, but there's also you're teaching someone else that maybe didn't have it before that they can also that they can trust or that they can lean into other people for help or that it's okay to ask for
Mhm.
help because these people that you idolize or that you look to, they started in your same spot and it doesn't make your journey less valuable just because someone else got better than you or
Mhm.
has like longer years of trying. It's like we all
Right.
started somewhere, and if we can use that knowledge to help people along, like, our world is
Mhm.
just gonna be a better place. So,
Right. Yeah.
that was very rambly.
No, I
Just
get it. I hear you.
okay, good.
I smell what you're stepping in. I get
Okay, okay,
it.
okay. Yeah. Well, so you were recommended to me by Emily Herbster, Peach and Honey Studio, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
She's
she's like,
cute.
"You should talk to Karlee," and I was like, "Okay," and I had found seen you on Instagram here and there, and then when I really started looking, I was like, "Okay, I'm sold," like
I feel
but
like people they come for the education and then they stay for the charisma. Or
yeah.
vice versa. Maybe people come for the charisma and then they stay for the education.
Yeah. Whatever it is, it's
What I lack in technique, I make up for in straight ballin' personality.
yeah, there you
So
go. I love it. I love it, and it's just great, like, I love talking to confident people because, while I struggle with it, and I think we all do at some point, like, you get that, like, imposter
imposter syndrome.
voice
Yeah.
in your head and you're like, "I'm not good at this," but I just, like I love that you're like, no, you stand back and you're like, "Dang, I'm so good at this." Like, I do the same thing when I'm making someone's quilt or long arming or even if there's, like, little mistakes, it's like, I have my mantra of that's good enough.
Mhm.
Like, if the piecing has done its job and it's got good seam allowance and maybe not every point is exactly perfect because I'm just a person, but then the quilting brings it to life and it's this
Mhm.
gorgeous specimen that I've created for someone or even for myself. I'm like, "Damn, I'm good at this." Like, it feels
Mhm.
so good to do this thing that I feel so like I'm so steeped in it all the time and I'm doing so much with it all the time to just still have that feeling about it, I think is like that's so special and so magical. And to me,
Mhm.
like that tells me that I'm in doing the right thing. Like,
Yeah.
and people can have whatever beliefs they want about it or the signs that they want about it. But to me, like that feeling of like, even if I have my moments along the way where I'm just kind of like, I don't know if I can accomplish this, but then still feel so triumphant at the end, or like even in the middle
Mhm.
of the process, it's like, okay, good, keep going. Like it's
Yeah.
your, like own self telling you, like, no, yeah, good job, buddy. Like
Yeah.
keep
Yeah. Well,
going.
and I think even too, it's like we all have the same 24 hours in a day.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the thing that yielded you're not proud of, if the fact that you are happy with how you spent your time,
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't really matter what came of it
Right.
because it's like you're at least honoring your agency to choose what your life looks like and what
Right.
your hour of the day looks like.
Yeah.
And I think like not to get super like spiritually sounding, but I'm
Mhm.
gonna. But
Do it.
like to me, I think that there's like this sense of like one of the in my opinion, one of the best things that you can do to honor like your divinity, like your
Mm-hmm.
creator, whatever that looks like for you, your divine creator.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best ways you can honor that is to own your choices.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it doesn't matter if you make bad choices or good choices. If you can stand and say, yes, I chose whatever that is
Yeah.
and own it and say, like, because this is my life and I get to choose whatever I choose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really like, I have a high level of respect for that mindset,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're saying, "Yeah, I chose to do this and it was a terrible mistake," or "I chose
Right.
to do this and you might think it's a mistake, but I don't."
Right.
And sorry, not sorry. I'm like, "Okay, respect." Like,
Yeah.
own it and live
Yeah.
it, and it's like, who am I to try to tell other people how to own their own lives?
Right.
So, I like that too. That's like,
Yeah.
s sometimes it's really just not even about the end result. It's not
Mm,
even about the thing that comes out of it. It's about the journey that got
mhm.
you there,
Yeah.
or the lack of journey that taught you, like, regret means something, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know, that got, like, really weird and deep, but
No.
n not sorry. Like,
Don't be sorry, and I've talked
yeah.
about it on the show before too, like, that personal responsibility piece, it just flies by people sometimes, like, they don't get that piece of life where they learn to take responsibility for their choices, and I think that's where
Mhm.
sometimes, like, dramatic topics come from is because people
Yeah.
don't have the ability to see that they've made choices, and whatever the result was, it was still a choice that they made, and not everybody is in an emotionally mature enough space to see that they have choices, to stop
Mhm.
breaking or to break cycles that they are in for themselves. And so there is that kind of
Yeah.
spectrum too. But if you can see it and you know that you can make different choices, as long as you can own that, like you said, like I'm
Mhm.
with you. Like I can respect a person who's like, yeah, I design my life. I'm the one who makes the decisions that I make, and I'm the only person responsible for those decisions, and, like,
Mhm.
you know, and that's the thing, ultimately, at the end of the day, nobody else is responsible for you but you. Not your spouse, not your kids, not your parents, no one. It's
Mhm.
just you.
Mhm.
And so, the deeper you can dive into yourself, that's where you can get more in touch with your artistic
Right.
abilities and desires, and that's where you can get in touch
Right.
with your more human self to reach out to others, to be able
Mhm.
to, offer your expertise or teach classes
Right.
or, it's like
Yeah.
those teachable moments can come, and if you have enough self-awareness of, like, the choices you made to get to that point, it's like you can help people with that, but you have to
Right.
have that
Right.
self-awareness too, and
Right.
so, like, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I think it's again, I don't know if duty is the right word, but I think that's kinda what keeps popping into my head is, like, if you have that self-awareness, if you take ownership of your choices, that, like,
Mhm.
you own your autonomy and can help people, then, like, I think you should, It's like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how as humans we connect and we learn from each other, and I think when, evolutionarily, if you wanna speak in those terms, like, when we lived in groups of 100 or less, like, we had to learn from each other. There wasn't any outside influence
Right.
showing us how to do things a certain way. We just had to learn from our small community, and
Right.
thankfully we have a larger community. We can do things differently and be more inclusive and accepting and all those things because
Yeah.
we're able to be exposed to other things beyond our little 100 person group. But I
Yeah.
think it still leans back to that, like, secure connections with people, being
Mhm.
willing and, like, vulnerable enough to share your mistakes with people so that they don't have to make the same ones if they don't want to. Um,
Right.
and then, yeah, like, sharing your gift with the world. It's like we're all gifted with something, and
Yeah.
it just comes out in different ways, and there's so many different mediums, and you found fabric as another medium for your art and
Mhm.
thread, and it's just so exciting to see, like, different avenues of expression and expulsion, as you called it. Like, it's just
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that's a person who understands the assignment. Like, you got it. So this is
Yeah.
this is great.
Yeah. Well, and I think I would even say just one correction to what you're saying. I don't
Mm,
know if duty is quite the right word. I would almost say opportunity,
mhm,
because I think like duty has this negative connotation that
mhm.
it's like, oh, I have to pay it
Right.
forward or whatever. But like
Yeah,
really, if we look at it more as like I love everything that you said,
yeah,
but I think the perk of this whole thing
yeah,
is that like when you make something that's so effing baller,
yeah,
you get to be like, "Yeah, I made that."
yeah,
Like, I'm
yeah,
gonna take credit because the credit is due to me, you
yeah,
know? And
yeah,
that's like and I think, like, part of what you're saying about this, like, self-awareness, like, be self-aware enough to realize that saying that is totally not egocentric. It's
right.
not cocky. Like, it's
No.
not 'Cause I'm, like, thinking, "Should I apologize for being cocky right now?" But, like, it's not a cocky thing, it's like, "No, I worked hard.
Yeah.
I busted my butt, like, I have the callus and the sweat to prove
Mhm.
it."
Yeah.
And so, when I show up and say, like, "This thing exists," or "This thing has changed because of me," like,
Yeah.
that it feels good, and it's
Yeah.
okay to feel good about it.
Yes.
Like, that's
Absolutely.
completely okay, and also, like, when other people feel that,
Mhm.
it says a lot about a person if they can show up and be like, "Get it, girl." Like,
Yeah.
proverbially, like, this is
Yeah.
not a female only thing.
Right.
Proverbially, prefer you know what I mean? But
Proverbially. Yeah. Yeah.
proverbially. But, like, to say, like, "Go you." Like,
Yeah.
how awesome for you, you know?
Yeah.
And when I find that, like, when you find that tribe within your community, like, because the quilting world has subsets all over the place that are all
Mhm.
different, like, characteristics of when you fit into a subset.
Yeah.
I wanna be in the subset that's like, I got your back, you got mine. I'm gonna call when you did something amazing. I'm also gonna call you on your crap,
Yep.
but I respect you enough that you'll do the same for me, and I'll own it, because
Mhm.
then that's what creates the elbow room for,
Yeah.
like, trust to come in,
Yeah.
and to say, like, "I trust you enough because I know that you wouldn't just say something flippantly, or I don't trust you because, like, you're whatever," you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
The lack of trust shows too.
Mhm.
But it's like when you have relationships like that, whether it's professionally or creatively or romantically or familially, whatever that is, when you
Mm.
have that trust, like that's the elevation between, like, not only finding common ground with people, but
Yeah.
finding higher ground.
Together.
And like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And pulling
and
people
that's
up to you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that. I love that sense of community because
Mhm.
it's, like, cool to know that there are so many people in this community that, 1, are really good at what they do
Yeah.
aesthetically, but are
Mhm.
also good people
Yeah.
and are that, like, the yeah,
Yeah.
that are also
Yeah.
good people,
Yeah.
and that's really cool, and I think that's like, it's cool to sit here and be like, "Quilting is alive and well."
Mhm.
Like, it's not a dying art form. It's really, really great to say that. Like, this
Yeah.
is really cool that we are shaping something bigger and broader and wider and
Yeah.
taller
Mhm.
than the people who left it to us. That's
Right.
an honor. It's an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for, sharing that, like, because I said duty, but I was like, "What's the word? That's
Right,
not the
right, right,
word."
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah,
yes, I
and I
I
feel
agree.
like we had to go through that
Yeah.
evolution of
Yeah, but you're right, it is an
both sides
opportunity.
of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It is an opportunity and one that's yours to take if you choose. Again, it's like
Mhm,
it's a choice, and some people choose to sit back because maybe they've got other stuff going on that doesn't allow them to feel like that's a choice that they can or should make, and that's okay, like, because
mhm.
there will be people who will step in and
Yeah,
take that and run with it, and it's great,
yeah.
and, um gosh, I just lost my train of thought. That's okay. I just yeah, I'm with you though. I love like meeting people who are really into what they do, who bring their love of what they do into everything and are also really good people who are like, I'm up here and I'm going to bring you with me. Like, and a rising tide, raises all boats. Like,
Mhm,
the more we elevate ourselves and bring each other along, the better we're all going to be for it. So,
mhm.
and I did just remember what I was gonna say. It drives me crazy when I tell people I'm a quilter and that I have a quilting business, and they're like, "Gosh, it's just such a lost and dying art." And I'm like, "Did you just hear what I said to you? Like,
Yeah.
is your hearing aid on, Brenda? Like, I just literally told you I'm a quilter. Like, it's not dead. It's not dying. You're standing in a quilt
Yeah.
shop." Like, not that that's the case, but it
Yeah.
just feels like to people who are it's like, "Oh, my Meemaw did that." It's like, "Okay, well, also I do it, and I'm in my 30s, and my friends do it, and I know a lot of other
Right,
people who are my age and younger doing it." Like,
right.
it's
It just
not
looks
dying.
different.
It just looks
Yeah.
different. It's not dying, it's not dead. No, people don't necessarily sit around a huge frame that comes down from the ceiling in someone's living room and hand sew on things. Like, that's not really what it looks like anymore. But we all
Right.
pile in someone's kitchen or living room with our own sewing machines and work on our own projects and talk
Yeah.
and laugh and watch movies, and you know, just live life together while we do this thing we love and we're creating
Mhm.
something like it's just yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, "No, no, it's not dead.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
alive. It's fine."
Yeah. And then you're like, "Okay, self-aware,
Yeah,
not quite yet." Like,
yeah,
not quite there. Like,
not quite there, yeah. It's funny.
interesting that you would that's a keep in your brain thought. Like,
Yeah. Don't say that to me. It's like
so,
when I would be like, "Oh, I'm a teacher," and people would be like, "I could never." And I'm like, "Okay."
thanks. Yeah,
Or
like,
like
what do you say? "Thank you?" Or, "Do you think I'm
I'm
dumb?"
like, "You
Or
probably couldn't." Like, I don't know.
yeah,
You
really,
know,
yeah, that's
with
what
that
you say.
attitude, you can't do
"Yeah,
anything.
you're right, you could never."
Yeah, not you. No, and, like,
Yeah.
my husband gets the same thing with he has a math degree and a computer science degree, and now he's in school for counseling, so he's a nerd, but,
Nerds
he
are the best.
I
I
know.
married a nerd too.
Yeah, so, they're, like, the
Yeah.
best
Mhm.
partners to have. Anyway, he would always get it with math because 'cause he's been teaching adjunct, math courses at Boise State since he graduated, essentially, and people be like, "Oh, I was terrible. I could never, da da da," just like it's like, do you realize, like, they obviously don't. Like, it's that still they're so stuck in their own kind of thing. They're not so, self-aware enough to understand how their behavior, their words affect other people because 'cause they're still only thinking about themselves, but in an unaware way. Does that make any
Yeah.
sense? Like, they're
Yeah.
saying these
Yeah.
things, but if they could, like, step out like, be aware of their own selves enough to be able to step outside of themselves in that moment and say, I bet if I tell this person that I hate their profession, they're not gonna like it." You know? Like,
Right,
"I
right.
think you're crazy." It's like, "Wow, thank you so much, Barbara."
Mm,
I know I keep
yeah.
using these random names. I don't know any one of these names, and I'm not talking about anybody specifically. They're just, like, names that pop in my head. I'm so sorry to anybody with those names. I'm not disparaging you, and I will try to stop using random names. But
My
anyway,
middle
yeah.
my middle name is actually Brenda Barbara, so I'm offended.
Brenda Barber. Oh,
Carly
well,
Brenda Barbara Porter.
that's
Take it
fun.
take it back.
I do, I take it back. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. That's that's so funny. Like, "No, that's my name." I'm like, "Oh,
That's my
shoot." Well, I just stuck my foot in my mouth, so that's cool. No. No. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, so besides the 10th anniversary of your book happening this
Mhm.
year, what else do you have going on this year?
That's like basically it. I decided that my New Year's resolution was to give up on basically absolutely everything except for this year.
Okay. Okay. That's
Well,
fair.
that and flossing. So,
Yeah. Flossing.
no, but yeah, I mean, this is a really, really big year for me. I started teaching online quilting courses in, I want to say 2017,
Okay.
which is really cool. So typically what I'll do, graffiti quilting is my most popular, top rated class. And it's the best class for anyone who wants to do free motion quilting. Like I'll
Mhm.
just say it, it's amazing.
Yeah,
Even if you're not going to graffiti quilt every quilt, you will learn copious amounts of free motion quilting that you can take on your journey and leave what you
sure.
don't, but there will be plenty to take. So I
Yeah.
typically teach graffiti quilting. Um, in spring and fall, and then I'll usually do like other classes in conjunction. Like I've done Mini Quilt Mayhem and Free Motion Frenzy and Lone Star Border Bliss, which was that quilt that
Yeah.
I just taught last fall.
Uh-huh.
But because it's the 10-year anniversary of graffiti quilting and I'm doing the new book, I am revamping my online course. So it used to be an 8-week class session where class was every other week. So 4 class sessions over the course of 8 weeks.
Mhm.
And now I'm expanding it to be much more robust. So it will be 6 class sessions over 12 weeks.
Mm.
Um, and the book is in conjunction with that. So yeah,
Okay.
so that's how I'm going to be spending all my spring. I'm finishing the edits of the book. I'm
Mhm.
so super excited. In fact, while I'm talking to you here today, I'm trying to decide if I want to make it hardcover or soft cover. So
Ooh.
yeah, if you see a poll on Instagram, it's because I just can't decide what people might want. I like hardcover because I feel like it's classy and collectible,
Mhm.
but soft cover is $5 cheaper to print, and people like soft cover because then it's easier to like spiral bind it or whatever. But
Yeah.
anyways, so I'm working on the book. That should be done. It'll probably start shipping to my students in July. And the
Okay.
cool thing about my online courses is even though we're not in person,
Mhm.
I always ship a welcome package with tons of awesome stuff. So it will include the book. I usually do my homemade caramels. So that was like my
Oh.
first business when I was in high school. I would make
Yeah.
homemade caramels and sell them. And now you can't pay me to make them because they're very labor intensive and they're just not cost effective to sell.
Yeah,
So
caramels are
if you get
hard.
them, it's because I love you. So I give those to
Wow.
all my students. So I give them a cute little pack of caramels with the recipe and then a bunch of fun stuff. So I'm designing some stickers this time around. I don't know why it took me so long to include stickers because they're like the thing for sewing
Yeah.
machines now.
Mhm.
Um, so there will be some stickers and then a cute like 10-year anniversary alumni sticker for
Mm.
this particular class celebrating the 10-year anniversary of graffiti quilting. I want to design an enamel pin
Mm.
that will come with that as well. There will be some graffiti quilting designed custom printed fabric in
Mm.
that as well. Um, and then some cute postcards of graffiti quilting. So it's kind of just this like bundle of love along
Yeah.
with the textbook for the course. So yeah, so that will be summer. So yeah, registration for the class will be open from March 1st until the class starts on September 7th.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's really like what's on my horizon is just I love graffiti quilting. I feel like the fact that I've been doing it for 10 years and I have an extra 200 pages to now update the book,
Yeah.
like this is I'm not short on ideas at all, which is
Yeah.
a really, really great problem to have.
Yeah.
And I really, really love teaching and I feel like I'm good at it. I feel like my students are happy with my classes. And so I love doing that. That's kind of teaching and quilting combined together to teach
Mhm.
quilting is like my dream job. So
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's really what's going to consume my entire summer into fall. And yeah, I'm like a one trick pony. That's all. I don't have anything cool going on in my life because I have no social life outside of quilting. So
Right,
when I
yeah.
meet people on the street that are not quilters, I say, "So I'm probably a big deal to your grandma." But not to
Yeah.
you. I'm like
Yeah.
not a big deal to anybody,
Right.
but yeah, if anyone were to know me, it would be somebody's grandmother who happens to quilt. But
Right.
that's getting less and it's more my street cred is growing a little bit.
That's good. That's good.
But yeah, so that's what I've got going on. Just
So
I
cool.
like being a homebody, so teaching online is wonderful and it allows me to connect with my students over a longer span of time.
Yeah.
I do have a couple in-person events. I'm teaching at the Minnesota Quilt Show in June. So
Oh,
any of
okay.
you Midwesterners that are up that way, please say hi to me and register for my cute little mini classes that will be there. So
Fun.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, congratulations on 10 years,
Thank you
and
so much.
that's amazing, and yeah, I am so excited to see the new version of the book and just keep following along with you because the charisma is real and the skills are real, and it
Woo!
just encourages me to, like, be a little riskier with my quilting too, which I can kind of because I'm so comfortable with the digital side of, like, long arming and quilting, it's like whenever I can kind of branch out, I'm like, "Okay, I can do this," like and so just seeing more and more of it, like, helps me feel braver, so I appreciate that,
That's awesome. Yeah.
and
Well,
that's
I'll have
so
to send
great.
you a custom printed quilt top from Honest Fabric to play with because
Oh,
I think I'll just warn you now, don't use it until you're ready to like fall in love with it
yeah.
because it might ruin you for other quilt tops. No, I'm
Yeah.
just kidding.
No, I
I'm half
love
kidding,
yeah.
but yeah, I'll send something your way to play with because
Oh,
I think any long arm quilter has really enjoyed it, and so I'm sure that you would really get a kick out of
yeah.
quilting one up. So
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that's exciting
yeah.
because I was literally like, "Okay, we're gonna get done with this, and then I'm gonna go check it out because I wanna see if like, what I can get," because I really do love, custom quilting things and bringing them to life, and so that would be really
Yeah,
generous
yeah,
and lovely of you.
y-
Thank you. Well, we'll
yeah,
look for your book release, and by the time this airs, your signups will be open for your fall
yep.
class,
Yeah,
and
and the only way that you can get the book is to sign up for the class. So
okay.
they're sold together.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
book is the textbook for the course because they really just round everything out and work really great together. The
Okay.
thing that's cool about the book too is that I've built in a ton of QR codes that will
Mm,
link back to additional content in addition to the live class sessions.
okay.
So it's all one big bundle packaged up nice and neat for it's
Okay.
really an experience. It's not just a book and just a class. It's like
You need all of it.
it's gonna change. You're gonna be changed. It's gonna ruin
Oh.
you for all other quilting classes and books. So, okay, now I'm getting too cocky. That's how I
No.
know that it's time for this to be done because
Okay, okay. Yeah, no, that's
I'm
great.
gonna break my legs falling off of this horse.
No,
So,
you're not. And then where can people find you online so that they can sign up and find all your fun things?
so KarleePorter.com
Mhm.
is where anything that they want to purchase would be that place. And then my day-to-day social media is Karlee Porter Design.
Okay. I will put links in the show notes below so that they're easily
Great.
accessible. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again. And we will stay in contact because I feel like we're best friends now.
Same.
Okay.
I'm glad
Good.
you said it because,
Okay.
like, we are best friends. All
Well, thanks.
right.
And we'll talk
Take
again
care.
soon. Okay. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.